our relationship with our bodies and what we put in our bodies is very much the same. It is a relationship. Like I always think about how, if we can treat our relationship with our body like a relationship, we don't expect relationships to be easy and perfect all the time, right? We expect to have communication, open communication, hopefully, respect, kindness, and those are things that we really lack when it comes to our relationships with our bodies and food.
I've been so excited to have you on. Yay. One of my favorite people ever is joining us today, Nadia Maxwell. Welcome to the Extremely Well podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. You're definitely one of my favorite people too, so I'm very excited to be here.
That would be very awkward.
I know.
If not, be like,
I actually don't like you.
Yeah. I'm just using you for your 100 followers. So let's start off by you introducing yourself, your passions, what you do, however you want people to know you, I guess.
So I'm Nadia Maxwell. I was born in New Zealand and I studied predominantly in Australia. I've been here for about 10 years. I'm a dietitian or non-diet dietitian to be exact. I am an intuitive eating counsellor, credentialed eating disorder clinician, and a clinical hypnotherapist.
That's new.
That is new.
And we're so excited about that. Clinical hypnotherapist. Yeah, you are.
Yeah, and so like I said, I've been here 10 years. I currently live in Geelong, in Victoria, although my heart is in warmer places. And I see clients in person and online. My passion areas are probably supporting people with their relationship with food and body, as well as everything women's health, hormonal health. So seeing my lovely clients with pelvic pain and endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, perimenopause, fertility, pregnancy, all of the good stuff.
Awesome. And what got you into that field of work? Like why are you passionate about that?
It's a really good question and one I actually struggle to answer because I think the reason I got into it and why I do it now are two very different things. I think, when you're 17, 18, flipping through a university booklet, you really have no idea what you want to do. And I think if you'd asked me back then, I would have said, I want to help people, right? And I don't think that part's changed, but I think me wanting to help people to eat in a certain way to improve their health came from a very privileged place of someone who is, and I should, say that I am thin, white, straight, cisgender, tertiary educated, and I acknowledge now how those privileges shape the lens through which I see the world and how everything I say, everything that comes out of my mouth, how it shapes that. And I think back then, with thinness being so valued in our society, that was a privilege I held, and I thought that meant I was really well placed to give people advice on nutrition. And so now, knowing what I know, I think differently, and I think why I do the work that I do is really to help people to rebuild that self-trust that society often makes us forget, especially when it comes to our relationships with food and our body.
That is so interesting because I don't know if like everyone has that thought process. Like even in the career that they're doing now, I think that it can be so like, this is what I do for work and that's it. Where you're like, I want to help people and like, why did I want to help people back then? And, that's really interesting. And so you see clients at the moment in clinic, online, in face-to-face, and you also have a podcast as well. Yes. And what is that called?
It's called Good Enough Nutrition. So it's still in its infancy. I think I started it around maybe July last year, 2023. And so Good Enough Nutrition is what it's called.
Awesome. And what is Good Enough Nutrition?
Yeah, so if you know the concept of good enough parenting, it's pretty much the same thing just for nutrition. So when we think about good enough parenting, we think about not trying to be perfect, but just being good enough is good enough, and knowing that kind of more of having that self-awareness and that option to kind of continue to improve and do better and repair is really the perfect role modeling for a child. And I think our relationship with our bodies and what we put in our bodies is very much the same. It is a relationship. Like I always think about how, if we can treat our relationship with our body like a relationship, we don't expect relationships to be easy and perfect all the time, right? We expect to have communication, open communication, hopefully, respect, kindness, and those are things that we really lack when it comes to our relationships with our bodies and food. I think we're so often judgmental and we internalize that from society. So when I think about good enough nutrition, I kind of think about taking the power back from what we've been told we should, quote unquote, should do, which are, things like clean eating, or it could be calorie counting, or it could be, quote unquote, health and, wellness. And instead, when we take the power back and think about what is actually good enough nutrition for me, what does that mean for me personally? And it's going to look different for everyone. So I think our values really come into it here. So when we think about what values might be associated with nourishing ourselves, it might be things like flavor, or maybe sustainability, or predictability, or socializing around food, or sharing, right? And I think once we have a really clear picture of what those values are for ourselves, not for anyone else, for ourselves, we can decide what good enough nutrition means to us and kind of hold that really flexibly. So knowing that if we're not eating how we want to or feel like we should on certain occasions, that might be okay because it's actually serving our value of sharing or socializing around food.
Which is, it's like, the name of this podcast extremely well. It's the reason the name is there is because I struggle with perfectionism, and I kind of laughed when I thought of it. I'm like, extreme sports and wellness, but it's really funny because I feel like in my life I'm always chasing this like extremely well. I want to be extremely well. I want to do things extremely well, like do the actual activity, whether that's work, whether that's extreme sports, whether that's my eating, whether that's my health. Like, so I often get into that trap of chasing that perfectionism. And I think our friendship has it's completely changed my perspective on so much, and especially my perfectionism and the way that I look at food. We've had very in-depth conversations about perfectionism and, this and that, and just allowing ourselves to trust that intuition and that peace. And I think I'd love for you to touch more on that intuition and what does that actually mean to be intuitive with your food and what you eat?
This is probably a perfect time to bring up one of my favorite analogies. I am a sucker for analogies.
Yeah.
So I didn't come up with this one. So this one is by someone called Dr. Rick Korsman, who wrote a book back in the 90s called If Not Dieting, Then What? But I actually changed it a little bit. So if you picture yourself in a little rowboat and you've got two paddles, one paddle represents knowledge and one paddle represents self-knowledge. So knowledge could be knowledge of, quote unquote, healthy eating or science or the benefits of movement or stress or sleep. And self-knowledge represents intuition, right? What feels good in my body. It can represent like connection with the body. It might be body cues, sensations, feelings, emotions, and our values and how we want to show up in the world. And so what I find is that society has really prioritized knowledge from a really young age, right? And so people I find that when people come to see me, they have a lot of knowledge about nutrition. And they're the type of people that'll come in and be like, I know it. Why can't I stick to it? Or why can't I put this in place, right? And they've got this really strong knowledge paddle arm.
Yep.
Whereas,
dominant arm, right hand is just Yes.
So strong. Whereas the self-knowledge, once again, I feel like society diminishes our ability to trust ourselves from a really young age. And so over time, we just lose that connection with our body and our intuition, and we end up just rowing ourselves in circles with the dominant arm. And so, yes, I mean, I love science as much as the next person. I love myth busting and educating on certain topics. And I feel like most of my job is supporting people to reconnect with their own body and with their own intuition and their own likes and their own dislikes. And then I added a little bit to the analogy. So I was out on a walk the other day and I was like, oh, that is the perfect addition. And so I also picture like we have a little motor on the back, and that little motor is support. So that support might be from a health professional like a dietitian or a medical or mental health professional, another nutrition or movement or body-based practitioner, or even like a spiritual practitioner. Or it can be friends, family, loved ones, or even like wider community, either online or in person, because I find that there will be times that your arms get weak, right? Like, and you can't keep moving forward. And that's where that little support motor can, help you to go further and support you when you feel tired.
Oh, I love it so much. That is so good, especially the rowing in a circle. Because I find myself rowing in a circle often. And I think, across social media and all media, there is such a strong messaging, like diet culture and all of that, right? It's so strong. And that intuition piece is just as important to keep the balance. And I think a lot of people also sometimes rely on that motor behind them. And I've done it in my past, looking at that motor, not necessarily as a support, but like the captain, I guess. And I'm like, well, why am I not getting better? And it's like, well, that intuition arm hasn't been in the picture. And I mean, going back to the good enough parenting and good enough nutrition, they're also linked, right? Because what children see from their parents as well is like they pick up. So the way that you maybe eat and things like that can, it's like everyone's human. And it's like we can pick up on that as well. And I think it's so important for people to find that intuition, what works for them and what doesn't. So before you were talking about like body cues and things like that, is that like hunger, or is that, what are like body cues, I guess, that people can look for?
Yeah, so in my field, I work a lot with, hunger and fullness. But like, body cues, there's so much information coming from our body to our brain. And when we're too busy, being potentially our perfectionistic selves, prioritizing productivity above all else, we tend to ignore our bodies a lot.
That's not us, is it, Nadia?
Not at all. And so we really lose that connection. So yes, I talk a lot about appetite, but it also relates to, tiredness, need for rest, pain, need to move our body. It relates to so many things, but even how things like emotions show up in the body, I think we can become so desensitized to. Appetite is the one I probably talk about the most.
Yeah, because that's the one I go appetite and I'm like, hang on, what actually else is there? Yeah. But it is, and is that symptoms as well?
Absolutely, symptoms as well. So it might be, and it's recognizing how certain things might impact symptoms, and vice versa, how symptoms might impact how we show up as well.
Yeah, and I think that's like the beauty of seeing someone like yourself in that space, because you can go in and be like, these are my symptoms, and you have like the knowledge, like very good knowledge. I'm like, oh, maybe it's because of this, this and this. And it's like, how do you feel when this happens? Or like, what emotions do you sit with? And I think the hypnotherapy coming into that as well is just like the perfect mix. And something that like I'm so interested in at the moment, and when I did one of your courses recently, it was like, I was like, this is art, like this is amazing. And I've done quite a lot of research and things like that on the nervous system, because I think it's so important for people. And when I saw like your graphic, I was like, oh my, maybe I could even like put it on here for people to see. But your knowledge on the nervous system is incredible as well, and how that relates to body cues and things like that. So I'd love for you to talk about nervous system and like that intuition piece and how they go hand in hand with then like symptoms arising and things like that too.
Yeah, happy to. And I think the nervous system is such a hot topic for a good reason, right? It's been forgotten for so long. And I think when I'm seeing people, some people know a bit and some people just don't know anything about it. So I really like to start from the beginning.
Please do.
I first started learning more about the nervous system. It would have been early 2021, and I did a course called Embodied Recovery, which was designed to support people in their recovery from an eating disorder. And so often in eating disorder recovery, the body is forgotten, which seems wild to say, but it is. It's really kind of cognitive based. And I think we need this beautiful marriage between, yes, I think top down is useful. That's when we're thinking about how our thinking impacts our behaviours, our thoughts, feelings and behaviours, but also how our body impacts that as well. And so that's bottom up. And the nervous system knowledge from that course that I did was really supportive. So I kind of based my knowledge of the nervous system based on the work by Dr. Stephen Porges, who came up with polyvagal theory. So it's a theory that helps to explain pretty much how our nervous system works, and it like intertwines so much science but also so much psychology. So I've simplified it a lot. It's quite complex. But how I talk about it, and we can absolutely use the graphic, is when we think about our level of arousal, we have three main states. So hyper, hypo, and optimal. Now, most people are familiar with fight or flight, or at least that terminology. And fight or flight is when we're in hyper arousal and when our sympathetic branch of our nervous system's activated.
And sorry, for people that are just listening, hyper is like up, right? Up.
Yeah. So I was doing the motion.
The hand motion,
Have to say it.
Yeah.
So hyper, up. So fight or flight. So we think quite a lot of mobilizing energy is what we call. So how your body might communicate in this state is you might feel tense, anxious, our breathing rate increases, our heartbeat usually increases. We might feel a bit like trembly, shaky, breathless, and a bit panicky. Mm-hmm. You familiar with that?
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, the last couple of months has been like, woo.
Yeah, so up. Yeah. And so that's hyperarousal. And then we've got hypoarousal, so that's down. So this is actually our most ancient pathway evolutionarily. It's what we call our parasympathetic dorsal vagal pathway. And it's because it's our most ancient, I often think of like an animal playing dead. It's like they become so overwhelmed and then they might freeze or shut down, collapse, fawn. There's lots of different words to describe this one, but those are the main ones: freeze, fawn, collapse, shut down. And how the body communicates in this state might be confusion, dull, shame, despair. Our heart rate might slow, and we might even feel numb or spaced out. You familiar with this?
Yeah, I'm also very familiar with this one. Yep.
Yeah. What I find in practice is that people often have their nervous systems have a bit of a preference of like moving up or moving down. I'm very much of an upper. Mm-hmm. I'm more of that anxious energy. Mm-hmm. But some people, for certain reasons, can also drop quite low. And at the same time, like we will tend to use all of the different states. We can only sustain being up for so long before we're going to crash too. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, we've got what we call optimal arousal. This is our parasympathetic ventral vagal pathway, newest evolutionarily. So it's really to do with, feeling safe and social, and it could be rest and digest. How the body shows up in this state is connected, grounded, you're more open, socializing is a lot easier. You can actually feel more present and focus and feel more relaxed. Yeah. So those are kind of like the three main states. And why I talk about these as a dietitian is because our food and our eating impact them in kind of around 3 main ways. I'm sure there's more, but the main three. The main three that I talk about is that if we're actually going for a really long time without eating, which I see all too often, is that we actually get pushed into fight or flight. And that's because our blood sugars start to drop low. Our body sees that as dangerous and says, here is some mobilizing energy, go find food. And I often ask the person in front of me, do you get hangry or irritable if you go for too long without food?
I'm familiar with that too, Nadia.
I see you. Yeah. And that's fight. That is fight energy. You can also have flight energy. So for me, that sounds like if I've gone for quite a long time without eating, maybe it's getting to lunchtime, I'm like, I'm so busy. I've got so much to do. I can't slow down. And then if I eat something, I actually feel a lot better. I'm like, oh, okay, things aren't as bad. And it's just because I have a lot of that flight energy. If I had coffee on an empty stomach, that's that, because coffee, yes, but also empty stomachs can cause some of that fight or flight.
So that's like a double whammy, coffee, empty stomach.
100%. Yeah. And so that's kind of and something that I talk with clients about all the time is making sure they're eating enough and eating regularly enough. And that kind of consistency and regularity is one way that we can really support groundedness in our body. So that's one way. Another way is actually through the experience of emotional eating. We were born emotionally eating in a sense, right? Food has always been comfort, and it's linked up with attachment as well, because from birth, a bottle or a breast has been really comforting. If you see a baby that's upset, they get a bottle, they get a breast, and they kind of like whimper and settle down, right? You can see that fight or flight into groundedness and action.
Yeah, totally. And it like brings you, down, like we were just talking before, that it is emotional because your emotions are coming with you.
Yeah. So, and that's why I hate it so much when people demonize quote unquote emotional eating or binge eating or feeling out of control around food, is because we've been doing it since the start of time. It's actually a really smart thing to do. If you eat when you're feeling stressed or sad or down or whatever the emotion is, your body is just trying to find regulation. It's just trying to ground. And I don't think that's an issue. I think it only becomes an issue when either that's the only way we know how to ground, or it's not the amount that we do it or the frequency that we do it isn't actually in line with our goals. So I really like just to normalize that for people, that emotional eating is actually really smart. And then the last way that eating impacts our nervous system is through our beliefs about food. So like I said, eating can be really grounding. And I forgot to say, this is a fun fact. So I mentioned that like bottles or a breast can be grounding. One of the reasons why dummies are so grounding is because it actually helps with our vagal tone.
Of course.
And helps to innervate that vagus nerve and that ventral vagal state.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
That's like sucking the thumb, dummies.
Wow.
Yeah, sucking, chewing can be really grounding.
I've been like vagal tone. I've been exploring that a little bit lately, and I've been doing a lot of humming, a lot of singing. I don't really gargle or anything, but like the humming, and I notice it. Yeah. Same with like during like breath work and meditation, like with Super Magnetic, they've just introduced that, and I love it, and it works so well.
Yeah.
It's so good.
It's a great way to change states, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
Oh, yeah.
But I didn't want to
say that keep going. Fact. Totally, that's awesome.
But yeah, what I was saying is how we feel about and our beliefs about food can also change our level of regulation. So for instance, if you're eating and maybe you're eating because you're hungry, or maybe you're eating to self-soothe, but then your brain's saying, don't eat that. That's a bad food. You're a bad person. Why are you emotionally eating? You've eaten too much. Of course that's going to be dysregulating. And the issue isn't actually the food. The issue is our beliefs about.
And the shame.
And the shame about it,
And I guess within that shame, you're going against your intuition in that as well, because it's like like your body, you feel good in that, but then you're like, oh, hang on, I shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. And sometimes we don't feel good in it. Sometimes we might eat past that point of feeling good, or we weren't hungry. But I just want people to hold so much compassion for themselves, because it's like there's more to this. And like I said, it comes into attachment, and it comes into, so many different things. Our relationships with food are really complex. So I think compassion is something that I work with or model for people a lot. So that in essence is kind of how the nervous system impacts, well, what the nervous system is, how I think about it, how we understand it, and how it impacts our relationship with food, or how food impacts it. It also connects with symptoms, which I can talk a little bit more about as well.
Totally.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yeah. So when we are in a certain state for a long time, actually I should say, so one helpful concept with being in that optimal arousal is something called the window of tolerance. And this was a concept by Dr. Dan Siegel, who's a psychiatrist. And it's almost like we can picture that we have a little window. And everyone's window is going to be a different size based on our genetics, our life experiences, history of trauma, but also things that change regularly. Like I know my window is smaller when I'm premenstrual, right? I'm going to get, sent out or triggered a lot more easily, or when I'm hungry, for example. Yeah. But generally, if we're in our window, we're more in that optimal arousal state. And we evolved the up and the down for good reason, right? For safety, for survival. And so we can't expect to be in our window 100% of the time. It would be nice, but that's not realistic. But I guess what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people to expand their window. So maybe things that used to trigger them don't trigger them so much. So I work around like the relationship with food and body and symptom part. But also just the awareness of where we are at a point in time and building our skills to return to regulation. Because the issues often come when we spend a really long time out of our window. If we're acutely in fight or flight, or we're acutely in freeze or fawn or shut down. And I know for myself, I normalized being in fight or flight for so long. I don't think I even knew there was another state, to be honest. Yeah. And we call this it's called your faux window. And it's when you're like just outside your window and you can actually pretend like you're fine. Other people will think you're fine, but you're actually not grounded. And I keep having to add caveats, but I should say that being immobilized energy and immobilized, which is the down energy, can also be positive. When we're immobilized, that can often be like during extreme sports or playing or having sex, right? Yeah. And the immobilized is often when we're like sleeping or digesting. So it's not all good or bad, but when we're mobilized or immobilized under the pretense of feeling in danger or under threat, being out there chronically is when symptoms can start to show up. And so what someone might notice in the body when they're more in fight might be like feeling really tense in their jaw, muscles really tight, shoulders might be up. You might notice that your appetite's really low, or you're struggling with sleep. You might be clenching your fists a lot. It can be that TMJ. And then in flight, this more like restless legs, sense of impending doom, like really struggling to sit down or stay still, fidgety, jumpy, can't stay on task, those kinds of things. And I should say that this can look a little bit different for everyone, particularly if someone's neurodivergent as well. Yeah. So that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
And if we're out there really for a really long time, our body can be like, it might start with whispers. The whispers are the tight jaw or the tight shoulders, but then the screams might be gut symptoms or pain that maybe used to be localized to one area might now feel like it's spreading, or it can be like this burning sensation, or it can be like struggling with sleep. It's like, I'm so exhausted, but my mind won't stop. It's like tired but wired. And so when we're out chronically, our body will start to give us symptoms to be like, hey, there's something wrong here. Same with freeze and fawn. Similarly, you might feel like bored or sluggish or shallow breathing, and how that can eventually show up once again as gut symptoms. It can be things like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. And I should say that like these things are complex. It isn't just down to the nervous system, right? It's immune function and so many other things as well.
Yeah.
But when
I feel like everything you talk about is extremely complex.
Yeah, it's nuanced, right?
Yeah.
And I'd like to make sure I'm speaking about things with nuance. But in a sense, I think knowing that if we are chronically dysregulated, there can be some repercussions. And I think what's beautiful about it is it just opens up a whole another avenue for healing, because it's not necessarily just around what you eat or what you put in your body or how much you move your body. It's also about how you look after yourself and your nervous system and, normalizing rest and not the hustle. And honestly, I think the biggest gift that of knowing this stuff is that awareness of knowing where I am and knowing that I do have power over it to support coming back into regulation.
Yeah, and I think awareness is so important. But I think on the other hand, that perfectionism comes into that too, right? Because it's like you are going to move through all of it, and it's like, and I think it comes down to like that self-trust that, you know what, like I am heightened. Like, for example, my last month or two has been extremely heightened. When I participate in extreme sports, I am heightened to the point where when I go mountain biking on like a shuttle day, I struggle to eat because the adrenaline is going. I'm going. And you know what's funny? When I come back from the weekend, so often I crash, and there's been up here all weekend, because often you're out riding, you go out, you have dinner out with friends and you're like partying, and then it's like you get home, the drive home, and then it's like, oh, you get home, you unpack maybe if you have time, and I found I've just crashed. And there's been many like Mondays where I've honestly just spent the whole day in bed. And then if I injure myself, it's like a whole double whammy on top of it as well, because physically I don't feel that safety. But I guess where I was going with that is it's awareness, right? It's knowing, okay, I'm, going to be heightened this weekend or this day. What am I going to do, or what's my intention, and how am I going to like self-care, I guess, comes into it. And it's like, how can I support myself through that? It's not that it's bad to go do the extreme sports. It's bad to be heightened. There's no good or bad. It's just like, how do we balance and how do you find that as well, which is so important. And through our conversations, I'm like, I feel like just being friends with Nadia, I've like released so much shame around so much in my life. And perfectionism is just like out the window, because you're like, oh, Heidi, I think that's your perfectionism. I'm like, fuck, it is. She's so right. But sorry, it's like, oh, well, how can I support myself? And it's coming from that loving space for yourself, rather than, oh, hang on, like I shouldn't be up here. I shouldn't be down here. I just, will turn to myself and upon reflection and go, well, what do I need right now? And it's like,
question.
Maybe I need some really nutritious food. Sometimes when I'm like not feeling the best, it's like, you know what, I need comfort. And that means I need comfort food, for example. And yeah, I think it's so powerful, that awareness, and also that like knowing that, hey, like it's okay that I'm here, and, I can work with a dietitian like yourself to like, if there is anything that feels out of whack, or because I know sometimes when you do learn this, you go, holy shit, sometimes like I've been up in this fight or flight my whole life, which I kind of have been. I've been between the two very much. And it was only through working with like someone who specializes in wellness, I think it was a naturopath at the time, that I was like, oh, this is what it's like to feel safe. Oh, this is what it's like to feel healthy, because I don't think it's like something that everyone necessarily gets to experience, depending on upbringing and all of that as well. So, and I think that's when like knowledge can be powerful, and you go, oh, like, yeah, what's that safety? And it's so interesting how like certain symptoms within your body change. For example, like I get a really tight neck and shoulders. You know what? I'm going to stretch and foam roll and get like my little massage ball that's sitting in the corner there and just get it in there. And I'm like, oh, and you feel that like just relax around it. And that in itself, like massage and things like that helps bring you down.
Yeah. And there are like, it just makes my heart sing when I hear about like those two things, that like awareness and compassion, because I think like nobody is perfect, and it's so important to kind of find out that what works for us without the expectation of being perfect. So that 100% makes my heart sing. But yeah, to your point of what supports us to come back to regulation or back into our bodies, it's really individual exploration, isn't it? And you mentioned like foam rolling and like massaging out places that are tight. I think that using the senses is just a wonderful way to do it. So I will kind of go through with my clients. I have this big list that I got from a beautiful OT, occupational therapist, and it goes through categories of movement, touch and temperature, looking, listening, smelling and tasting and chewing. And we just find what for you, either brings you joy. It might help you come down from hyper, or it might help you come up from hypo. And it's just building that toolkit of options that you have. And yeah, you might have things in there that you don't want to do long term. Like I know when I'm down in hypo, I will scroll my phone. And I know that doesn't necessarily
scroll hole
in the scroll hole. And that doesn't necessarily, it's not super helpful, but sometimes I actually feel it's helpful enough to bring me up enough to then do the thing that's nourishing. And so I think it can be really beautiful forming your own little toolbox of things that ground you or are supportive, and asking that question that you asked before so beautifully, what do I need right now? And it can be something bigger, like a walk or Pilates or a workout or a surf or something that does take more energy and more capacity. But sometimes you actually don't have the spoons for that. You don't have the capacity. And so in that case, it might be lighting a candle. It might be having a shower. It might be putting on some music. It might be scrolling your phone, calling a friend, right? And I guess the beauty of it is that you start to build more bodily awareness about what works for you.
And I say this with, obviously you have to find your own thing, but just so people get like a bit of an idea, like what is your kind of like, I'm really interested, like what's your kind of self-care? For example, when you're really up, like what do you like to do?
Yeah.
And when you're down, like what do you like to do to bring you up?
So I think I'm still figuring that out.
And I feel like it's forever.
It is forever,
isn't it? Because things change so much.
Yeah. And like I've spoken to you, we've spoken about how this year I'm wanting to get into a little bit more of my feminine energy. I've been in the masculine for a very long time. So I'm trying to bring more of those more nourishing things. Like I sometimes still feel guilty for sitting down and reading because I should be doing something, or I feel guilty for, going out and watering the garden because there's better things I can do, right? Or going for a walk when I should be running. Like I still have a little bit of that, and it's much, much better than it used to be. But those things all are very nourishing for me. Watering the garden, going outside with my cat, patting my cats. Like if I'm sad, all I really need is my cat. Or a hug from my partner. And to be honest, I have been loving the gym recently as well. I think I went 3 years without it over COVID. And actually over that time, my relation of not doing a whole lot of exercise, my relationship with exercise got so much better. And now the gym feels really nourishing for me. Yeah, there's a little list. That's for awesome.
You. It actually just sparked a question. I'm really curious to see what your thoughts are around this, because I mentioned before when I ride, I am really heightened, which I think a lot of people are. I mean, I think what's at the front of your brain that's like all your risk and everything?
Good question.
Where's Trav when you need him? At this, not the hypothalamus, is it?
The risk, I'm not sure.
It's like the front of your brain. And
you've got your prefrontal cortex.
That's
it's like
it.
your very
that's
logical.
That's it, isn't it? And it's like you're like I think it's prefrontal cortex, yeah. And it like matures when you're like 30 or something like that.
Yes.
Anyway, if you like, there's some studies. See, I'm not good with the studies. I read stuff and it's like in and out. I don't remember who it is, but there's certain people that have had like accidents where like the front of like that part of their brain is gone and they lose risk. So unless you have missing that part of your brain or for whatever reason that's not working, I feel like you're going to be heightened when you're doing extreme sports. It's just the nature of it with the adrenaline and the hormones that are pumping through. I lose my appetite. So when I'm in that scenario, and I often go, and it's this really hard balance between I know that I need to eat enough and I always feel a lot of anxiety around the fact that I'm not eating enough and I'm not fueling my body and I'm scared that I'm going to crash the next day versus like, how do I eat enough today? And what I usually do is just make sure I have more frequent stops and I will have like a banana or I have like I usually have rice cakes and things like that. That's quite light and easy to get down. Are there any other tips that people can use like in that scenario if they are feeling heightened and when they're riding? Like,
Yeah, for sure. And so coming back to your point about like looking for risk and danger, pretty much everything I just said around the nervous system, it's based on what we call neuroception. It's our bodies are always searching for threat and safety. They're always searching for those things. It's like we've got the spidey sense that does not turn off. Am I in threat? Am I in safety? And so, 100%. So your body is going to bring up sensations based on whether it's perceiving threat or safety. And you might know that you're safe. I mean, in extreme sports, are you ever safe, right? To an extent, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a degree of risk.
There is a degree of risk.
Because even in the mornings I struggle to eat because I'm nervous.
Because you're nervous,
like,
yes.
oh, will I hurt myself today? Or
so it makes sense, right? But now that you know that, then you can play around with it, knowing there's not a good or a bad way to do it. So, and it's a very similar question. It's a little bit different because you don't have the risk, but for people who work out in the morning and some people can't eat before working out and they're like, is that an issue? And it's going to really depend on the individual situation as to how much we work around it and encourage it. Like if someone is starting from a base of undernourishment, we're really going to try and get something in beforehand. Or if someone's like an athlete, a competitive athlete, and performance is their thing, it's like, yeah, if you're going for the Commonwealth Games, we really need to try and have a supportive system in place that supports you to reach those goals. If, you're nourished and you're and you can bounce back more easily, then it's okay to play around with it. And I think it's around playing around what works with you. So I think one thing that diet culture has done is it's demonized liquid calories. But I think liquid calories, I don't call them liquid calories. That's the way diet culture calls them. But like whatever the nourishing drink is, I think that can be a really nice way to give you some nutrition without feeling like things are heavy in your stomach or having to do the work of chewing. So even if it's something like an up and go, yes, it has sugar in it, but that's not the end of the world, especially not when you're like
exercising or at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that like Powerade and things like that as well? Or is that like a different?
Yeah. So I guess, it depends on performance goals. Ideally, if we can get some like before exercise, if we can get some protein and carbs in, and then after exercise, some protein and carbs. And then if you're doing long bouts of exercise, then you do need the carbs to keep fueling you, right? Then that's wonderful. But if we were just during exercise and you're just wanting to get some carbs in, then yes, Powerade would be an example of that. So too would be like the rice cakes or the banana that you mentioned. You can make your own homemade little electrolytes and put glucose or sugar in there, so you are getting the carbs, the fuel from it at the same time. So I think first and foremost, we have to stop demonizing sugar. And then secondly, it's around playing around with it and figuring out what works for you and what you can tolerate.
So I guess it's like stretching that window that you spoke about and having trust that like this is within your window.
Yeah.
You're okay before you even start. let's like push it and experiment.
And you'll always have another chance, right? If something didn't sit too well on the right, it's like, oh yeah, that's a bummer. It didn't sit right in my tummy. And I've learned a lesson here. I can try something new next time. That's okay.
Yeah, totally. And you've touched on relationship within yourself and your body multiple times. I saw on your Instagram there was like a post about attachment styles and how that comes in. And it's like, I guess when I was recalling that story just then and my thoughts, like if anyone knows attachment, like I'm anxious as fuck. And it shows up in my relationship and stuff, but it does show up in my relationship with food and my relationship with my body as well and my health. And I'm always like, I need to know the answers, and that control piece and everything comes into it too. So do you want to talk more on that?
Yeah. So I think I posted that just on a whim. I think I was hearing about attachment theory a little bit more from, I think it's like a very psychological based theory for people who work with couples. And I was like, well, how would we apply that to our relationship with our body? Because like I said before, I think about our relationship with our bodies as a relationship, right? So look, I don't know a whole lot about attachment theory, and I know there's more than actually 3. I think there's 4, but I only really know of the main 3, which are anxious that you mentioned, avoidant, and secure. And so as I was thinking about it, I was like, what would it look like if we were assessing our own relationships with our body based on those 3 attachment styles? Because I think it's wonderful that people pay so much recognition and attention and energy toward attachment in relationship. I'm like, awesome. And I also think our relationship with the body, our bodies need a little bit of love as well, because if we don't give them love, we're just doomed to absorb everything that society says. That is, you have to look a certain way, you have to perform a certain way. Your body's aren't allowed to change.
And we would not put that on our partners' bodies either compared to our own.
No way. Or friends or family, hopefully.
If you do, you need to go see Nadia. This is your sign.
Yeah. And so when unfortunately, because of the way that bodies are treated in society, we do actually have to spend energy on our relationship with our body if we do want it to change and improve. And I was like, what if we took this attachment theory and applied it to that? So I can't fully remember what I said, but if we think about more of an anxious attachment towards our bodies, I mean, you can let me know how it might show up for you, but it's like, or it could be like a hyper focus. So it might be a hyper focus on certain bodily areas or what you look like, or even symptoms. I've seen that a little bit, like where clients might hyper focus on something like bloating, and it really it can really wind us up if we're sending our attention to that so much.
Like hypersensitivity?
Yeah. So it might look like that. It might look like feeling like we need to change our bodies. Once again, I kind of see it as around focus. I don't know how that might show up for you and your anxious attachment style.
You just nailed it. I was like, I'm hypersensitive. I focus on parts of my body, symptoms especially. Like I'm even like, I may eat something or something. I'm like, what's happening? Where am I at?
Yep. So that's kind of a possibility for anxious. I should say I'm making this all up as we go. Avoidant, I have more of an avoidant attachment style naturally. And to be honest, I think we can move between all of them, and it's not necessarily unhealthy to be able to have that movement. But avoidant might be totally disconnected from the body. So your body might be communicating with you, but you totally ignore it. You might not hear it. You might push through things like pain. That's kind of how I see avoidant showing up. And then secure would be this two-way communication, right? My body's communicating with me. I'm communicating with my body. Hopefully a level of respect. And it's kind of like couples counselling. Like we wouldn't expect to go to a couples counsellor and be like, relationship fixed, all good, never have to go back. It's something that we build on with time. And yes, we might miss a cue, misstep, right? But in relationship, there's always the opportunity to repair, and that's the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just like picturing like me in my rowing boat, just like rowing up, row, row, row.
I'm your little motor on the back.
yeah. Just kicking. Go, how you go. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And I think there's so much knowledge, and I think an opportunity for reflection for people as well, and questioning, like what's my relationship with my body and
if
things
we're
like that as
talking
well.
about attachment, one other thing that I'd add in there is that our relationship with our body and food is so related to attachment in our upbringing, right?
Yeah.
If we felt like we were too much or not enough, we might adopt that in how we attach to our own bodies, because that's maybe how our attachment was formed as well. So there's like that complexity to it, so that much. This is like, if you are more anxious or more avoidant, like this, it didn't start with you. Generally, we're born very connected. Like if you think about a baby and how they relate to their body, I just picture them, being in awe of their toes. They're like, this is incredible. Yeah. And they're so in their body, not thinking about it. They're just really in it.
They just kick their nose like no one's look. They don't care. Their toes, their belly, they just play with it, and they're like, oh yeah, it feels so good.
So cute. Yeah. And so we really weren't born hating or judging our bodies or feeling like too much or not enough. So clearly it's developed over time, and I think that's a really nice thing to remember. Your core, your essence is loving, and how do we support you to move back there without having the expectation that it's going to feel positive all the time? Not in this society, right? I think sometimes body positivity is just another stick that we beat ourselves with. Yep. So having room for growth and movement and change, and not expecting perfection. Yeah.
I mean, we didn't talk about this previously, so I'm springing this one on you, as in before we filmed. But I'm really curious because I mean, a lot of the reason why I want to start this podcast is for body inclusivity and diversity, because there's so much to be done in extreme sports. And I think it also comes from a place of there's so many athletes and people look a certain way because of the nature of the sport, for example, and to excel in that sport, but why, like, I guess I'm just like curious. It's like, and this stems not just in sports, but everywhere. It's like, how can we change that? It's like where in our language, I guess, even can we like change that? Like, do you know, or any resources or anything for people that are like, oh, I've never really thought about that?
Yeah. It's such a like deep and important conversation, isn't it? And my knowledge rests on the knowledge of people so incredible in this community, people in bigger bodies, different cultures, ethnicities, abilities. And so in terms of resources, some that I love are people like Sonia Renee Taylor. She's got a book called The Body Is Not an Apology. People like Reagan Chastain or Aubrey Gordon. The podcast The Maintenance Phase is a really well-known one, but she's got a couple of books as well. And even people like Sabrina Strings, and she actually wrote a book called Fairing the Black Body. And in essence, it talks about how fat phobia or anti-fat bias actually rests on a foundation of racism and oppression. And so I think the conversation about, body positivity and body inclusivity is a wonderful one. I think it does propel us forward. And it's also so important to see the deeper roots in terms of how it is rooted in oppression and power and often in white male bodies having more power as well. There's a wonderful quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's by, I think it's Naomi Wolf, and it's, in essence, it's that dieting is the most powerful political sedative, because when we, as people with periods, are so focused on how we look, how the world perceives us and our bodies, we don't have the energy to focus on, patriarchy, misogyny, oppression in other forms in the world and fighting against those. And so I think it goes so deep. And even the smallest steps that we can take are huge to move things forward. So you mentioned something like language. And I should say first, just like recognizing that bodies don't all need to be the same size. It's like height. We're not all the same size height. We don't have all the same size feet. And although like, yes, we've got BMI, which is problematic in and of itself, which categorizes bodies into quote unquote underweight, quote unquote normal weight or healthy weight, quote unquote overweight and quote unquote obese. And I put those in quotation marks because they're exceptionally stigmatizing terms, especially the O words. But they put labels on it that, we've delegated to certain body sizes as a society when like we naturally have a bell curve of body sizes and that's normal and healthy, right? And so, yes, I mean, I hold so much compassion for people in different size bodies, especially in biggest bodies because of how society might treat them. And yes, everyone's body is going to be different and I pay different. It's a different case when somebody's body is changing or there's underlying pathology or biological things going on as well. Like there's so many nuances there. But in essence, it's really important for people to know that body diversity is natural. It's nature's way, right? Or, if we think about the species of dogs, like they all look very differently, right? There's species of humans, like we're going to look very differently too. And so one little way that we can do this better is one of my favorite little quotes is my body, my business, your body, your business. If we shouldn't be commenting on other people's bodies, even if it is like in good intention, a lot of the time it's still not okay, particularly if it's uninvited or unsolicited. So that's one little boundary that I think can be really helpful. And then just role modeling language. So you would notice that I put words like overweight and obesity in quotation marks because they are so stigmatizing. So if we want to be conscious of saying things like bigger bodies, people in larger bodies, and reflecting back how people might talk about their own body. So I know there's like fat acceptance movement and people reclaiming the word fat not as a derogatory term, as like a descriptive factor of being in a fat body, and that's okay. So trying to take that power back as well. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, I think
big long on my high horse.
No, that was great. And I think we can sit here too as two white, slim, cisgender. We can sit here and this is an opportunity where I want to say to everyone, I'm going to put a bunch of resources, especially in the extreme sports space, because there's so many wonderful people making awesome movement there that I can't remember where I saw it, but someone, I think it was Curvy Surfer Girl. She's great. But I put I follow her on Insta and she put up like a great like list of resources. So I might even link that post in my show notes, and if I make this into a reel or something, I'll put it in there as well. And then I think everyone was commenting all resources as well. So that's a really awesome place for anyone that is looking for resources or inspiration or just want to see like just diversity in all its beauty, because I think there's so much to be done in that space. I also wanted to move on and talk about a little bit about your journey with extreme sports. Nadia supported me. I ran a little like skate clinic last year, and she came along, and it was really cool seeing like someone I'm so like my friends outside extreme sports like came in, skated, and Nadia, you killed it. I was like, oh, you've got skills. And I guess I wanted to like for you to talk about because I know movement has been something that you've loved as a kid and getting back into the gym and skateboarding and things like that. I don't know your journey around it, like those kind of extreme sports and things like that.
Yeah. So like it's interesting because I guess how I understand extreme sports has evolved as I've known you, right? Because I kind of would originally have thought of like, okay, extreme, right? Snowboarding, skiing, mountain biking, all the kind of extreme stuff. But actually, in talking to you, I know we both did gymnastics when we were younger, and I guess it's technically an extreme sport because it doesn't involve risk gymnastics.
Oh my God, yeah, it can certainly be extreme for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe not the way I do it now, but
yeah.
totally it is for sure.
Yeah, so I guess my journey probably started with gymnastics. I started when I was like 5, I think. My dad was a gymnast, so we were a very gymnastic-based family, and I loved it. It was so fun, and I think it was just so foundational for so many different body-based skills that are transferable to other sports. So I actually did that from, I think, age 5 to when I started high school. And
that's a long time.
Yeah, really long time.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because I was thinking about, why did I stop gymnastics? And I think it comes down to a couple of things. Perfectionism, of course. And I think perfectionism more in the sense that when I started high school, it was my first time going to school. I was homeschooled until high school. And so I just had such high standards for performance at school. So homework, at that point we were doing gymnastics 3 times a week, so 6 hours a week in total. And so I was just like, I can't keep up with this as well as getting the grades I want at school. But also fear. I think you reach a certain age and it's like a certain age, a certain level where you're like, wow, I'm human. And when I was up to doing things like flick flacks or back handsprings on the beam and grand circles on the bar, I was like, whoa. I can, because I broke my arm twice as a kid doing gymnastics, but you get up, you dust it off, you keep going. By the time I got to like 13, I was like, wow. I remember it really hitting me, and just like not performing. I grew up in a really small town, like a town of like 10,000 people. So like the level that we were performing at and training at, we couldn't keep up with the bigger clubs. And I remember, so I went home to New Zealand midway through last year and I got all my old diaries, and there was this one page in my diary. It was the last gymnastics competition I ever did. And I wrote that I was so disappointed with my performance at the gymnastics competition, and I tried to hold it in. I didn't tell anyone. And that was the last one I ever did. So perfectionistic tendencies definitely come into it. But it was actually really beautiful. I did adult gymnastics again when I was working out in the Grampians in 2017, 2018. And it was just so fun to reconnect with it and reconnect with an extreme sport that I really loved and actually made up a lot of my childhood.
We need to go do it together, I reckon. That'd be so much. I've been wanting to do it for ages. I'm keen to do adult gymnastics. I would love to do like flips and stuff again.
Yeah. I don't know if my 31-year-old body can do it, but I must say
that level of fear is a whole nother level.
But it's realistic. It's realistic. But I must say, like, even me lowering the expectations of like what doing gymnastics is. For instance, the other day the gym was empty. Like it was just me in it for like 15 minutes. I was like, so I just started doing some handstands and some cartwheels, and I was like, this is so much fun. And I think knowing you and knowing the joy you get from those things, and then re-experiencing those endorphins and that adrenaline for myself, I'm like, hey, actually, you can just do it even in the smallest moments. It doesn't have to be let's go to a gym and, pay an instructor.
Yeah. And skateboarding, how did you go with that?
Yeah, so that was really fun. So I did skateboarding a little bit as a kid as well. I was, it was the era of Avril Lavigne and Skater Girl.
Yeah.
So my dad would take me skateboarding every now and then, just to the local skate park. So it was kind of waking up old muscle memory for me. So it was really fun. I think what I loved the most about it was like you said, it was just like a group of gals. Some had skateboarded quite a bit before, some hadn't. And so it was just that really supportive environment to do it in. Yeah, it was so much fun.
Yeah, it was such a good day. I loved it. And what about, do you have any other extreme sports that you're dabbling in, or is there any that you want to try?
I used to surf a little bit, just a tiny bit as a teenager. And then
I don't know if you've told me this before because I would have lured you out on a surfboard for sure.
And I think once again, fear comes into it. So I did my last year of high school in France, and when I came back,
that's cool.
Yeah, it was great. But I didn't pick up my surfboard again from that point onwards. And I think honestly, fear of sharks, which I know is so irrational because
it's not.
I'm probably more likely to get killed going out running than I am surfing. But once again, I think fear is a big barrier. Probably two things. So fear, but also like barrier to entry, right? Because you do need a board, you do need a wetsuit.
I've got those things. I'm just looking at you. Like,
I'll come out with
it.
It'll be fun.
Okay, we can go on a mellow day.
Yeah, a nice big board.
Yeah, okay, but yeah, it's the barrier to entry in terms of equipment and things like that, as well as the fear piece, which I totally get.
Yeah, and like coming into like hustle culture and productivity, like just the time that it takes to do it as well. Like I think and once again, like I said, I'm trying to get better at this and to actually have more downtime or rest or joy in my day. But when I'm like, it's half an hour to the beach and then it's the time out there and then it's half an hour back.
I mean, I understand why a lot of people can surf and like not work, like or any extreme sport and not work because it's just. It's time heavy. You've got to have a lot of time and a lot of space to do it. So I get that completely.
But it's so rewarding, and I guess you kind of, where is that line for you, right? Like I said, like doing the gymnastics, and when I was just like having a gym session, I was like, I can do this here when no one's looking, or even when people are looking.
Yeah, totally. Do a handstand.
Yeah,
we're at we went to the beach. It was a nudist beach recently, and we were just, I mean, we were wearing clothes. But we were just doing like handstands and cartwheels and stuff, and it was so much fun. And I was like, yes. Yeah. It's good just to like play, just to do things you did as a kid. Like if you go to any beach, you see kids like cartwheeling and handstanding and doing all that kind of stuff. And we lose that with society's programming and things like that as well.
Hustle culture. Yeah.
Hustle culture for sure. And I mean, we touched on it before, but what are you doing for self-care at the moment?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned the gym and my cats.
Yeah.
Watering the garden.
Yeah, which we love.
Yeah.
And what have you got in the garden?
So we've got our passion fruits are almost ready, which I'm so excited.
Do they have the beautiful flowers on them?
Yeah, so that was in spring and now we've just got like, they're really bushy. Yeah, and like at least 10 passion fruits on there. So I'm very excited. We only moved into the house about a year ago, so things are still in their infancy. But my blackcurrant bush is moving along, our lemon and lime and our fig. Our avocado's a little bit sick. My guava is not growing.
A guava? Wow.
Yeah.
You're bringing like a little bit of like the north and the warmth down here. You're trying to make it work.
Come on. Yeah, so a few fruit trees, but I've actually one way that I practice self-care and I've found a lot more joy recently is the person who owned the house before us, Betty, she's lovely. She was a big gardener, but mostly flowers. And initially I moved into the space. I was like, flowers, who needs them? Pulling them out and planting fruit trees. And then over the year I was just like, I've grown to love that there's flowers all year round. And I get this little vase and I pick flowers every week and I put them in my bathroom and they just bring me so much joy.
I love it. I love seeing your flowers that you pick. I'm so glad that you share that on social media. It's I'm like, it's actually really funny you say that because I've just never been a flower person. Like I'm just like, like fruit and veggies, yeah. Like, but now since I've like the veggie gardens growing and stuff, I'm like, I think I want some flowers and also some like lavender and stuff to bring the bees in and like the insects and things that you need.
I think it comes back to that like productivity conversation, right? Because flowers aren't quote unquote productive. They can't feed us, right? But yeah, I think
that's so true. It's just like pure pleasure, like eye pleasure, just looking at those flowers. I guess smelling them too.
Nose pleasure.
Eyes and nose pleasure. All of the things. But it's important to feel pleasure within your day, you know, and if that's like nose or eye pleasure or mouth pleasure, then like ear pleasure and touch pleasure. You need all of it.
All the senses.
Yeah.
Which is coming full circle back
Full
to the
circle.
senses.
Full circle. Senses are important. And what are your current offerings at the moment? Like if people want to work with you or they like really resonate with what you're saying, how can people find you?
So I am the most active on Instagram. So that would be at Nadia Maxwell Nutrition. My website is I don't know if I have to say that part.
Everyone does. And I'm like, you don't have to say that. I feel like people know.
NadiaMaxwell.com.
Yeah.
And then so I'm seeing people in person in a spot in Grovedale in Geelong. It's called Inner Strength Healthcare. I work alongside some fabulous pelvic health physios. And then I am about to start practicing out of a spot in Melbourne where I'll be doing dietetics but also more clinical hypnotherapy as well. That's in Camberwell. And that'll all be on my website. And I also see people online. So I actually love Zoom. I think it's a wonderful way to connect with people all over the world, all over Australia and all over the world except for the United States and Canada because insurance does not like those two countries.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, sorry. But if people want to see me for like pelvic pain and endometriosis, I do have an online course as well that anyone around the world can
It's
purchase.
fab.
Yeah, thank you.
It's so good. Yeah. I did it and highly recommend. That's so cool. And so you online is your private practice?
So my private practice is online and in person. So that's all me. So I've actually I'm going full time as of February this year in my private practice.
Ooh.
So and even if
book with Nadia.
I thought you like write a book. I was like, oh God, no.
I don't have time for that.
Your podcast.
And you have a podcast.
So my podcast, Good Enough Nutrition, which you can find on Spotify and Apple.
Awesome. And what have you got coming up?
Yeah, so lots of good things. So like I said, starting in Melbourne, doing more clinical hypnotherapy. So I should say clinical hypnotherapy is wonderful for so many different things. The evidence is really around digestive symptoms, IBS, and I should have said before, I love working with people with digestive symptoms and IBS as well, but also for pain, like pelvic pain and anxiety-related symptoms, anything nervous system related, right, as well as there's not much research around relationship with food and body, but definitely I've been having some real fun sessions with clients, people that might struggle with emotional eating and binge eating and a challenging relationship with food and their body. So, yes, so that's exciting, working one day in Melbourne and just integrating it into all my practice if people do want clinical hypnosis as part of our work together. I myself and another beautiful dietitian, Steph, are doing an endometriosis course for dietitians.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so we're hoping that'll be up and running in March because pelvic pain and endometriosis historically just has not had enough awareness. And when I was learning about it, there were no courses out there. Like I was just pulling all my knowledge from the research and other clinicians, like no dietitians really that were doing that stuff. So we're having that training course coming out for dietitians. Awesome. And I'm going to keep going with the podcast. We have some wonderful practitioners on. I'm interviewing a naturopath next week and an exercise physiologist and a couple of psychologists the week after. So
and me.
And you.
so right after this one, we are recording with Nadia and I don't know where it's going to go. You're speaking to me on this side of the podcast. You may see a completely different Heidi on the other side.
So excited.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel so like, oh, I'm there with like psychiatrists, psychologists, other dietitians. I'm like, and then there's me.
We cannot wait to have you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming today and speaking. You're so wonderful. You're so knowledgeable. I mean, you're like the perfect rowboat, I reckon. Like you've got both arms. They're beautiful. You're intuitive and you're so supportive and nurturing as well as you're so knowledgeable and your support at the back is incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love you, Heidi.
Oh, you're the cutest. I love you too. Hello. If you are are watching this, it means you've made it to the end of the podcast. And I'm so blessed that you've chosen to spend the time here with us at Extremely Well. If you liked what you saw here today, and I'm hoping you did if you're here at the end, can you please hit that subscribe button, hit the follow, leave a review, tell us what you liked, what you didn't like. This is all for you. So we want to make sure that we are serving the community in the best way that we can. If you want to connect with us through our other channels, I'll leave them down below in the description box, and I can't wait to connect with you next time.